Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome along to yet another walk through the woods of my near my home in Suffolk. Welcome along. Beautiful day here in Suffolk. The sun is shining, the sky is blue, and I'm finally getting out to make another video because I've been stuck indoors for nearly a week now with the weather has been absolutely insane here. The wind has been howling. The rain has been coming down. I mean, it's been wonderful for my garden, but not so wonderful for me being able to produce content. So welcome along. If it's your first time here, thank you very much for joining me for this walk through the woods and on such a beautiful day. It really is. It's wonderful here. This is basically what my channel is. I go for a walk. I talk about subjects that are on my mind, things that are current events, and I give my thoughts and opinions. And today is no different. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you very much for being here yet again. And I thank you one and all for nearly reaching 300. I'm going to do a short video when I hit the 300. I've been thinking about that one for a while, but you know, I'm so appreciative. Thank you so much for being here and for the subscribes. I really appreciate it. So today is in the never-ending saga that is my channel and the subjects that I talk about. Today I'm going to be continuing that series with yet another discussion that I think fits with the things I've been talking about. And today's discussion is about modern day slavery. Now, if you've been watching any kind of news anywhere in the world, I'm sure you would have been hearing about this subject, about slavery anyway. Not necessarily modern day slavery, but slavery definitely. And people talking about reparations, that kind of thing. So I wanted to address that with my thoughts about that. You know, people were talking about slavery 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 400 years ago, and I don't think anybody's really addressed the big issue, which is modern day slavery, which we're all living in. Whether you, I don't care where you're from, we're all living in modern day slavery, and I'll explain what I mean. So I've done a video before about the financial system, how it works, what it means to us all, and I believe that we're living in a modern day slavery based around money. Money is modern day slavery. Now, if you don't think I'm right, then think about this. Try and live without money for a day. How do you think you could live without money for a day, for a year, for a month? Do you think you could live without money? How would you get by? So first, I think we need to go back a couple of steps to understand where money comes from and why I think it causes slavery. So there's a couple of different dynamics at play here. Now, the first one obviously is the creation of money. Where does money come from? So if we need to address that first is, okay, so if we think, everyone thinks that the government prints money. They don't. they pimp that out to privately owned central banks. Privately owned central banks. In America, it's called the Federal Reserve. Now, the Federal Reserve literally has a license to print money. Okay, it's privately owned. Privately owned. You know, some of the biggest banks in the world. You know, the owners of the Federal Reserve and every central bank in the world. Don't think you're special. They all have them. There's not many countries in the world that don't have a central bank, and they're privately owned. They're not owned by the state. Federal Reserve sounds kind of federal, but it's anything but. It's privately owned. So they print the money, either physical, like the fiat cash. Well, I say money, I mean currency. Let's get that clear right from the start. They print the currency that we use, the fiat currency, the paper money, if you like, the paper currency. They print the currency that we use every day on a daily basis that we call money. And then that gets put into the system. The government issues a bond against that. So if you imagine that as a security, the government is saying, well, we issue a bond that people can buy as well. The government issues a bond against the money that the privately owned central bank is printing. Okay, so that basically secures the money. So basically, it's security to say the government is backing this money. How do they back it? We'll get to that after. Right. So the privately owned central bank prints the money. It goes into the system. And then it gets through commercial banking. You know, there's lots of different mechanisms that get us into the system. Now, to the creation of money, it comes from a privately owned central bank, but that is, from its very creation, a debt note, because the central bank wants to be paid interest on that money that it just made up. And I mean made up in a very literal sense. They just plucked it out of the air. It's the printing money. The cost of printing is what it costs them to make it. Okay? So they have the license to print the money, and they create it out of nothing, and it gets put into the economy. The government backs it through a bond that gets sold on, that securitizes, gives security to the money, if you like, to say, yes, the government backs it. Okay, that's the first mechanism. A privately owned company creates the money and puts it into the system. Now, think about that for just a moment. Now, how would you feel? Obviously, that's called the Federal Reserve, so we've come to, your central bank, wherever you are, I don't think you're special. It is, literally, they have them in nearly every country in the world. There's only a couple that don't. Now, imagine, if you like, if you will, a privately owned company, say Coca-Cola, for instance. Be less white, thank you very much, Coca-Cola. adding to the racist argument and slavery argument, of course. So imagine Coca-Cola was printing the money and putting it into the circulation. How would you feel about Coca-Cola printing the money and being that having that license to print the money? Well, no one would feel good about that. But we've been trained into this belief system that the central banks are, owned by the government or owned by the state. They're not. But imagine that. A privately owned company like Coca-Cola had the ability to print money, put it into the system. Oh yes, I hear you say, but the government's backing it. Okay. Now we get to the second. They call that money going into the system the M2 money supply is what they call it. How much money they say they're putting into the system. Now, every day they increase that money supply. Okay. Now, especially since the pandemic hit, especially since then, has more and more been put into the system. Now, especially in Western developed nations, if you like, since the pandemic came, they've printed money to infinity, and they've openly admitted it and said, we will print into infinity to keep everything operational. In other words, they're panicking because they have no tools left to keep the economy going. Now, the term central banking, we're going to come back to that as well because it's very important. So we've got, that's the M2 money supply from the central banks, backed up by the government through bonds. You with me? Okay. Then we have another mechanism. Now, commercial banks, the bank that you bank with, I don't care who it is, here in the UK, Barclays, HSBC, all these banks that people bank with. Now, imagine that you want a loan, say a house loan, a mortgage. Now, you go to the bank, okay, and you say, I want a mortgage, I want $500,000 or whatever it is that you want for your mortgage to buy a home. And they approve the loan. Press a few numbers, press a few keys on the keyboard, and voila, they create the money out of thin air. It's fugazi, it's not real. They've just made it up. So they've just increased the money supply by pressing some numbers on a keyboard. Okay, so how are you feeling so far? You feeling good? Okay. So we've got a privately owned central bank creates money out of thin air, licensed to, remember. And then you have the commercial banks, the everyday high street banks, create money by pressing keys on a keyboard. Now, how do they have the ability to do that? So what we have is your money that you put into your bank account, okay? Your money, your fiat currency. Let's not call it money anymore. Your fiat currency that you go and earn, that we call money. You earn that, you put it into your bank account, okay? Now, the bank then can borrow against that money, can lend against that money, okay? So the rule was, this is a wonderful trick that they've got, and it's another license to print money. So this is called fractional reserve banking, all right? So fractional reserve banking means that there was a rule, was a rule in place where the bank had to have a 10% of all depositors' money within the bank at any one time. So 10% of all the money that's deposited into your accounts, that's not yours anymore, it's theirs, okay, just let's clear that up. 10% of all that money has to be kept in reserves, okay? They changed the rules. Now, they can lend out the other 90% of your money to other people and charge them interest on your money. Are you getting paid interest on your bank account for holding an account with these banks? I don't. I don't know whether you do. I was actually getting charged for my bank account. I had money sitting in my bank account, and it wasn't a small amount of money, and I was getting charged for having a bank account while they were then lending my money out to other people and charging interest and making money from my money. So they lend out the money, $500,000, whatever it is, to someone else, and then they charge them interest, okay? Now, then what happens is on their books, it shows that they have the $500,000 that they've lent out, but then it's showing a positive coming back, obviously with the interest. So they say, okay, we lent out $500,000, but we're actually going to get paid $650,000 back. They can lend 90% of that $650,000 out again. All right, so are they holding the 10% reserve? No, they're creating money, just out of nothing, the same way the central banks do. So you have massive amount of money getting created from private companies, just vast amounts of money, right? So you have the M2, which is bonded by the government, and then you have this commercial banks creating money out of thin air through loans, okay? So vast amounts of money is getting created. Now, what happens when you create vast amounts of money? It lowers the value of that money. So it lowers the spending power. It takes more of those dollars, pounds, or wherever you are in the world to buy the same item. So if you're going shopping, you will have noticed that what you can buy with that same fiat currency is now getting less. You can get less for your money because the value of the money has gone down. You with me? Okay. Now, then we get back to the bonds, okay? So the government is releasing these bonds to back up the money that's been created by the central banks because they asked them to, okay? So I do apologise if you hear a bit of wind. It's not coming from me. It's still a little bit of wind around. It has been insane for the last 5 days. For the last week, it's been absolutely nuts. So the government issues bonds. So what are they securitizing against? What does those bonds mean? What is it security against? So how can the government, how can they back up that money? Really? What are they using? You and me. So what they do is they calculate how many people in the country are earning money and paying tax. It's important. And then that's what the securitizer, that's what the security is against, is you and me. We are the security on that money that they created. Yeah? Okay, and as we've just seen what's happened in the US with their stimulus package that the Biden administration has just got passed, $1.9 trillion. So we've seen vast amounts of money being created, and it's all secured against the taxes that you and I will pay in the future. Our children and our children's children will have to pay that money back. Now the problem with all this is the central bank wants their pound of flesh for creating the money out of thin air. The fugazi. They want their pound of flesh. So the question I'm asking is, where can you get that money? Okay, so let's just say that they've produced 100 trillion, for instance, and they want 1% back, but there's only 100 trillion created. Where does the extra trillion come from? It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Well, it does because they press some numbers on a keyboard, right? But even still, the money creation, there's only so much money that's been created. How can you pay back more than has been created? You're starting to see a problem here. Now, This debt slavery, if you like, there's lots of different names for it, but this is essentially it's debt slavery. From the moment that money, or fiat currency, let's be clear about that, from the moment it's created, it's a debt note. And that debt has to come from somewhere. And that debt is you and me, what we can produce and what we're going to pay in tax over a long period of time. Not just us, our children and our children's children. Now, who owns these central banks? You know, if you have a look at the debt, the global debt, all this, the debt clock, if you've never seen the debt clock, go and have a look. US debt clock or the international debt clock or whatever you want to see, but the US debt clock is now at, I think it's 28 trillion. 28 trillion. You know, if you go and have a look at the world debt, it's something like 200 trillion. Where's all this money owed to? Privately owned central banks. And who owns them? Who owns these banks that we're owing trillions and hundreds of trillions of dollars to? You know their names. Rothschilds, Rockefellers, JP Morgan, those guys. They own the creation of money, and they own you and me. So, do you feel free now? Do you feel free in a world where you have central control from privately owned central banks? And then what happens? The government needs to be able to pay back the interest. They can't service the loan, of course. They can't service the interest on the money that's been created. It's impossible. There's not enough money being generated to service the debt, especially when you shut the world down. And then what happens? You have these privately owned central banks own the government. What happened in Greece? What happened in Cyprus? You know, what happened in those countries when the government defaulted on the loans that they got from the central banks? You know, the European Central Bank. What happens when you default on those loans? The people suffer. It means that all social programs get cancelled. Have a look around you. Have a look around you. Are the social programs in place that are helping people? There are some, you know. In America, Social Security is in desperate need of more money, but it doesn't get it because the central banks demand their pound of flesh. Now, when I say central, I do mean central, and this is going to be key to the next part of what we're going to be talking about. So this whole debt slavery, it doesn't matter what colour you are, whether you're black, whether you're white, whether you're Asian, doesn't matter where you come from, doesn't matter who you are, we are all living in a debt slavery society. Now, what can we control that? I mean, really, we're living in this world that's controlled by these central banking families, and there are families. Well, then, I heard an interesting quote just the other day when I was listening to something. It was, "Own nothing, control everything." So, if you imagine that you and I, we own our property, we own our house, and we think that's our, we own something. First, you need to understand your birth certificate and what that means. And I've talked about that in a video in the past. You don't even own you. From the moment you're born, you're born into captivity through your birth certificate and through legal jargon. That means you're not in control of you. You don't own you. You are a slave to the system that is controlled by centrally controlled powers. Now, like I say, you don't have to believe anything that I say. In fact, I ask and I urge you to go and look for yourself, because some guy on the internet telling you things doesn't mean anything. I'm a conspiracy theorist, by everyone's own measure. And if you looked at my last video, what conspiracy theorists are? People who question the narrative. I've done a lot of research, I've done a lot of reading. I don't know everything, I'm the first to admit, but I urge you to go and look for yourself. There's a video I did not too long ago, about 6 weeks ago, I think, called The Great Awakening. What that means, the Great Awakening is people waking up and recognizing how language is used to enslave you. And it is. The lawyers of the world, with their legal jargon, their legal contracts, and the way the words are used. And if you don't understand the words, and most of us don't, the education system makes damn sure of that. Who controls the education system? The government. Now, does the government want you to thrive? They want you to earn enough just to pay taxes and make sure they can service the debt that they racked up, and you can barely get by. And then we're talking about raising taxes yet again. More taxes. Oh, we have to raise taxes because, you know, the national debt's out of control. And then we're talking about green taxes as well. A green tax is the biggest scam on the planet. I've talked about that, climate change. It is, you know, while I'm the first to admit that we need to change the way that we produce electricity and power our homes and power our cars and all that. You know, I'm the first to admit that, and we have the technology. If you don't believe me, go back and look at my other video. The future is now very, very bright. We already have the technology to change the world. We're not talking about windmills. We're not talking about solar panels that can get covered in snow and dirt and not work, or windmills that get covered in ice and snow and not work anymore. We're talking about 0 point energy. It exists, it's real. We have the technology right now. Why aren't we using it? Who controls the government, I wonder? Non-governmental organisations telling governments how to operate, like what happened last year. The World Health Organization, a non-governmental organisation telling the governments of the world how they can operate. WEF, World Economic Forum, controlled by who? The world's millionaires and billionaires, telling governments how to operate, how to run their governments, how they should work us, you and me, how they should raise taxes against you and I to make the world a better place by their standard. Without talking about the technology, they're talking about more nuclear power stations. Obviously that worked out really well in Fukushima and in Ukraine. Now, by this stage, you're probably sitting there pulling your hair out thinking, oh my God, you know, I'm a slave. There's nothing I can do. The world's coming to an end. It's not true. And this is very, very, I want to be really clear about this, okay? And this is the most important thing that I can tell you today. All these systems that we're currently living under that enslave us, we're talking about government, we're talking about banking, media, okay? All these systems are all what? As I've said before, centrally controlled. Central banking, government, federal, central controlled government. You know, the local government bows to the federal, bows to the state, you know. Here in the UK, obviously the local level bows to London, the money capital of the world. You know, the three power centres in the world: Vatican, intellectual; London, money; Washington, military. Those three power centres control the world, centrally controlled. Now, that makes us slaves to the system, and before you think all is lost, it's not. 100% it's not. Now, the centralisation is the problem, okay? So how do you get around that centralisation of the control, the power, the intellectual property, the media, the government, everything, banking? Banking's the big one. How do you get around that? I mean, how can we possibly escape from that system that enslaves us so deeply? Because we need to use fiat currency. We need to use that money, as they call it. It's not really money. How do we get around that? How can we escape from that? Decentralization. Okay, as the name suggests, decentralize it all. Decentralization, what does it mean? What does that actually mean? What does it mean to decentralize banking, for instance? Okay, now I'll give you the briefest rundown because we've only got a couple of minutes left. Decentralizing banking or finance or money creation means, if you've never heard of digital assets, cryptocurrencies, or distributed ledgers, I urge you to go and look at it because it's going to revolutionize the world. Blockchain, distributed ledgers are going to revolutionize the world. Because what that means is a decentralized ledger of account, okay? So banks and central banks are shitting themselves currently because of what blockchain is doing. They're trying desperately, they're scrambling. From 2017, where there's a massive run up in the Bitcoin price, central banks have been, that was deliberately shut down, by the way, using Bitcoin futures. If you don't know, it wasn't just a run up and it wasn't just a bubble. It was deliberately brought down by Bitcoin futures and them shorting the market, much like we saw with GME. Shorts. Who controls that? Oh, that's right, centrally controlled stockbroking. It's all centrally controlled. So they're desperately scrambling to get ahead of this technology. Now what it means is you control your own money, okay? Decentralization is taking away the power from the centrally controlled banks, right? So you no longer have to go to a bank to get a loan, for instance. Decentralized finance, or DeFi. You've probably heard the terminology. DeFi, decentralized finance, which means people who have money spare will lend it into the system. Okay, you have to collateralize a loan, which means you have to put forward collateral. If you want to borrow against something, you have to put that forward. But decentralized lending, decentralized financing, decentralized insurance, the world is changing very, very rapidly. And using these decentralized models, and there's many, many platforms that are doing it. Bitcoin was the first, obviously. It has the biggest household name. It is, it's been marketed as a store of value. People are flocking into it where they used to flock into gold and silver as monetary metals. Silver is also an industrial metal. The demand for silver right now is absolutely off the scale. But people are flocking into things like Bitcoin because as they inflate the money supply and the buying power of that fiat currency, not money, as they inflate the fiat currency supply, it means it takes more of those same dollars to buy the same thing. So what do? You buy a physical asset, well, physical in the terms of you're buying something that it is, you own it, like gold, silver, digital assets. You are buying that, and as the money supply, or the fiat currency supply increases, the buying power of it goes down. So you see the price of American dollars, for instance, everything's done in American dollars. Because American dollar is a world reserve currency, if you don't know, that's coming to an end. The world reserve currency status for the American dollar is coming to an end, and that will be what I believe will be swapping over to a gold-backed currency. Central banks will probably produce their own currency still, but it will be gold-backed and using digital assets as the exchange mechanism between them all. That's my thought. But decentralized finance, decentralized everything, and it's all done on blockchain and distributed ledger technology. I urge you to go and read about it. It's difficult to fit all the information into a short video, but it's key that you understand the technology. You're never going to understand it all because it's even beyond me. I've been in it for more than 3 years now, and you don't have to understand all the mathematics behind it, but you need to understand how it's going to change the world, and it is going to change it for the better. It will free us from the binds that bind us at the moment. Now, what it does is it takes away the central banking control over money. So what blockchain does is there's only so many. It's built into the codes, built into the mathematical algorithm, if you like, that only so much of that will be produced. Like Bitcoin, it's 21 million of them total will ever be produced, which means it's deflationary over time rather than inflationary, which is the fiat currency supply. Now, imagine a world where you didn't have central banks producing the money, or the currency that we use, sorry, I keep on getting the two. The central banks weren't in control of producing the currency, and because of that, the interest payments on the money that was created are no longer there. How much extra money would localized governments have to spend on social programs, on things that are actually going to benefit the community and benefit the country? Vast amounts. You wouldn't have to pay taxes on your wages. You might have to pay a sales tax. But decentralization of everything is happening, and you need to understand it and be part of it. If you can read about it and understand it, I wouldn't say just put your money into something without researching it. I would say go and do some research, do some reading, understand what's coming, what's happening as we speak, and understand that the slavery that we've all been living under for generations is coming to an end. It's a very, very exciting time. I hope this sort of gives you a bit of bit of an insight into what's happening in the world. It is a very exciting time. It's you know, obviously with all the scare that we've been going through for the last year, it's sort of really daunted people. But I wanted to make this video to give you a bit of hope and a bit of insight into what's happening, because it's a very, very exciting time. Don't panic, don't worry. But the most important thing is get out, meet with each other, see each other, spread some love in the world, and spread some joy and spread some good news, because we're desperately in need of it, and we desperately need to be in contact with each other and lift each other up. I hope you have a wonderful day. Enjoy, get out and get some fresh air in a wonderful location like this. Look after yourselves, look after each other, and I look forward to seeing you real soon. Bye.